Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Data Driven Online Marketing and Positioning for SMBs. My name is Tosh Brooks, and I am the Program Coordinator for U.S. Small and Medium Sized Business Entrepreneurial Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may be new to us, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to helping entrepreneurs access the knowledge, mentorship, and resources they need to start and grow successful businesses. Today's session is designed for founders who are actively building and growing their business. Whether you're still refining your business model, managing cash flow, expanding your customer base, or figuring out how to scale what you've already started, running a business often means making a big decision with limited time and resources. Our goal with today's program is to share practical insights that can help you move your business forward with greater clarity and confidence. Before we dive in, I'm going to launch a few quick polls so we can get a sense of where everyone is in their journey. We use this feedback to help shape the programs and resources we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. While you're answering, feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining from today. We always love seeing the range of places founders are dialing in from. We'll also have live Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to submit questions anytime using the Q&A feature. While the poll is running, I'd like to briefly recognize the partners who make these programs possible. The work we do at the NASDAQ Center is supported by organizations including NASDAQ, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the NREIT Foundation, KKR, and BPM. Their support helps us expand access to resources and knowledge for entrepreneurs everywhere, and we're grateful for their partnership. Now, let's get started. So we had our polls going, and let's see. Our first poll, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? And we had 76% of entrepreneurs on the call today are feeling optimistic, and we do have about 24% that are focused on surviving in their business. And then our next poll, what is keeping you up at night? Was it finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivoting? And it looks like we have about 45% of entrepreneurs today are worried about sales. So thank you for joining this call to get some online marketing and positioning information. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Samantha Sloane, founder and CEO at Saslow House.
Hi, Tosh. Great to be here.
Thank you, Samantha. Welcome, welcome. So I'd love to kick us off today with you just telling us a bit about yourself, your business, and your journey here.
Awesome. I would love to. So, I would say the shortest version is I have for the past 11 years built businesses typically ahead of where consumer behavior is going. So, my first company was actually in personalized wellness. And I exited that company by selling the intellectual property to a $1 billion global wellness brand as the category was really taking shape. From there, I actually built a company helping individuals create leverage in a labor market where the data was fundamentally shifting massively. And I'm sure we're all seeing that. And then today, I work with 7 to 9 figure consumer brands and I'm also building a little bit of tech. I am bringing to market a first of its kind creator model for physical retail, built around the return of local influence and the creator economy. These 3 businesses have spanned online to brick and mortar, but honestly, I would say the one skill underneath all of them is the ability to read data closely, interpret consumer behavior early, and of course, working with where the current market is heading instead of against it. So that also aligns with the poll of people really wanting support and focus towards sales and marketing. So I'm really excited to dive in today with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what you just said is about positioning your business, right? And you've described positioning as a living asset. So what does that mean, and why is this mindset so important for businesses today?
Yeah. So, if I may start by just defining the term the market, right? Because a lot of times we're actually talking about two different things. So, if we think about the market in three distinct pieces, right? We have your person. So, that's going to be the human with the problem on the other side of your service or product. Their options, and that's every other way that they could solve it, including not doing anything, right? So, including staying stagnant, and then their moment. And that is really the conditions in which they're deciding in. So, a great way to think about that would be things like their money, their fears, their lived experience, their day-to-day week. And here's the thing about those three pieces, all of them are alive. None of them will be the same in 6 months. Likely, none of them will be the same in a few weeks. And so that's what I mean when I say that the market is a living, breathing ecosystem. And that market is always asking one singular question, and it's who can I trust to solve this right now? So whether you have a plumbing business or you have a skincare brand, that is the question in which your consumer is asking. And what's convenient is positioning is the answer. So that really shifts everything because it means positioning isn't the thing that, as founders, as business owners, we put out into the world. It's actually a response. So, in other words, you're not writing it once, you keep answering it. It's an ongoing conversation. So, typically, what changes with this question? And to go back to those same three pieces. So again, that's going to be the person changes, right? So their priorities shift. What mattered in January may not matter in June. Their options change. And that could be a new alternative shows up. And what made you special may become the standard. And I think a lot of us can resonate with this in business. And then, of course, finally, the moment changes. And I think we're all in this whirlwind right now, no matter what business we're in, of the moment changing. And that's the economy tightening. That is maybe a different fear sitting in the front seat. And any one of those movements changes the question, right? So if your answer doesn't move along with it and isn't malleable, you are in essence giving last year's answer to this year's question. And you may be left wondering, why is no one listening when they used to before? And just to kind of round this out and take it one step further to make it really tangible, I would say that every business is in a relationship with their market, most likely everyone on this call. But the question I would want to ask you is, are you in conversation with your market? Because those are two different things. So a conversation has two pieces, right? It has a question and a response, a back and a forth. And if you think about even your closest friend, you would never just blast text them or voice note them and then completely ignore their response and then continue to do the same, right? You have this ebb and flow, you have this back and forth. Yet, so often, that's how business ends up treating their marketing, right? It's a big broadcast out, and it's often not listening back in. And that's where so many of us, and my goodness, I've been there, end up funnel optimizing or just over optimizing in general. And I know we're going to dig into AI a little bit today, but that's where AI can come in too, where you're tweaking the page or you're squeezing the click rate and you're trying to shave off a step, make it a little bit faster, make it a little bit better. But again, that is a one-way broadcast, and it's one way by design. So, what I've learned and what I often speak to my clients about is that every hour you're inside the funnel is an hour that you're actually outside of a conversation. And that can end up where you are ultimately optimizing yourself out of contact with the person whose head you're positioning actually lives in.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. So to feed off of that, founders often receive conflicting feedback from their customers when they do get that conversation, right? So how can entrepreneurs distinguish between isolated opinions and meaningful patterns that actually should influence their position and strategy?
Yeah, I love this question because it's so important. It is the most important thing. However, it's really hard to discern because I think the old advice was often consider the source, right? We talk about these are my buyers, these aren't my buyers. This is my industry, this isn't my industry. And so the old advice was, okay, well, if the feedback isn't from your buyer, ignore it. And I do want to stand 10 toes down and say that that advice has expired because the consumer experience has fundamentally changed. To take it a step further, I would even say that the buying sequence has reversed, right? And so, what I mean by that is 10 years ago, if you were making a buying decision, again, to go back to the plumbing and the skincare, because those are two very different businesses, the journey typically started with some form of light research, whether that was a word of mouth, whether that was Google, whether that was starting on your website. But there was a level of education first where you, as the business, were able to write that first impression. And other people's opinions came second, and that was more of a fact check. Whereas today, the reverse is happening, right? Your person is typically researching on TikTok, on social, in reviews, in comment sections, in AI, right? In Claude, in ChatGPT. And maybe, I mean, I know that's something I do. Maybe some of you are doing that as well. Long before they even see your site. And they may never see your site. So by the time that they arrive at your business, they arrive with a perception. And what's really important to note is that you didn't write the perception, right? And so marketing loves to say that every happy customer is in essence a walking billboard. Whereas what we rarely finish is the rest of the sentence, which is everyone now has a broadcast tower. And this is exactly what I meant earlier, where I was talking about the shift in consumerism. And we may go as far as to say that every business right now is a media company. And you may say, no, I'm not. But I would challenge you on that. And here's why. Whether you are marketing on social media or not, your customers are. So every interaction with your business, every interaction with even your industry, good, bad, or indifferent, from anyone, customer or not, can be published in the exact rooms where your person is doing their research, right? And I'm not talking about, trolls on social, right? I'm talking about the structure in which we build buying decisions. And these rooms are buying decisions where these buying decisions are formed, excuse me, everyone is holding a microphone. So to answer your question, how do you distinguish? I would say I would ask myself two main questions, right? And these two questions do two different jobs. Number one is who said it? And that can tell you whether you need to change something. And then the other question is who will see it, right? And so when your best fit people are repeating the same feedback, I would say that's certainly a pattern, and it should change your product or offer, your positioning, even if that change is in the minutia. The part that still works like it always did, right? That stands the same. But when any voice repeats itself in rooms where your person is researching in, then that pattern is also forming in your buyer's head, whether it's accurate or not. And because of that, it does demand an answer, right? Because an opinion doesn't need to be right to become a pattern. And so that's where businesses can preemptively, get ahead of things because anything repeated enough in the right room becomes, well, this is what everyone says. Well, this is what everyone is doing. And suddenly now you're chasing trends, and this is the perception that your next customer, ultimately is carrying. I would say when it comes to the response, it's easy to kind of get this wrong in both directions because we don't need to chase voices one at a time, and that can feel very whack-a-mole, and it can also read as defensive. But when you answer perception at the positioning level, that shifts, right? So if the rooms are repeating, let's say, a doubt about your category, your industry, your brand, your positioning can address that out loud before you or your business are ever directly asked. So one structural answer can be 100 individual replies, and that structural answer would be in your positioning. And so the watching is already kind of built into your week, in terms of that's something that you want to always be preemptively doing so that you can start to catch these patterns and see, well, when has this graduated from a singular opinion to a shift in perception? Again, even if it's not about your individual business, and then that's kind of your cue to step in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you touched on this a lot. I love that. Perception is reality, right? So
Yes, good and
with
bad.
right. So with that, right? So we know that. How should
Yeah.
founders balance staying true to their core brand with evolving their positioning as the customer behavior and market conditions change over time? How do we make sure that they don't lose themselves in what they're finding online?
I know, because it can be so easy to do that. And it can be so easy to feel like you're chasing or you are playing whack-a-mole. I will speak from my own businesses over the past 11 years, and I will speak from the advice that I am giving founders, excuse me, on the day to day, which is, how I would encourage you to think about the three things living inside that question, right? Which is your core brand. That's the main piece. And then the consumer behaviors and the market conditions. The two things that we usually treat as variables would be the consumer behavior and the market conditions. I would say are actually constraints, not because they hold still, but because their changing is inevitable and it never stops, right? It is malleable by definition. So you don't need to manage change around your brand. I would actually say bring it into your brand. And so what I mean by this is a lot of us carry this picture. And as founders, listen, our businesses are our babies, for better or worse. A lot of us carry this picture. My brand is a pillar. It stands strong. It stands true. It stands in the middle, so to speak. And then consumer behavior is kind of happening alongside it. But I would actually invite that founder to pull it all in together. So, in other words, your brand isn't standing next to the market, it's a living member of it. So, for whatever reason you started your business, acquired this business, came into this business, it was born into a living market, built for a person in a moment against a set of options. So moving with the ecosystem isn't something your brand needs to learn to tolerate, but rather it can be native to the brand. And then you're moving in tandem, similar to an inhale and exhale. And so sometimes the breaths are really shallow, they're short. That could be something like, let's say, a shift in messaging. Sometimes they're deep, right? A really deep breath where that may be, let's say, a repositioned offer or a restructured product line. Either way, the breathing never stops. The only things in an ecosystem, that aren't moving, unfortunately, are the dead ones, and we can't have that be, your business. Um, so something that I recently had a conversation with someone about, and to go back to the skincare brand, and maybe this is why this is top of mind, but is that this founder had said, I built this skincare brand to serve the customer. I'm not going to give too many details, but in XYZ conditions. But then the customer moved, the condition moved. So if you're unwilling to move, you're actually no longer loyal to your customer. You may think that you are because you're saying, well, I'm staying true to what I built, but you built for, in service of the customer. And so we don't want to stay loyal to an old, outdated version of that customer taken on launch day or taken on, when you decided to birth this business. And I would say that's not staying true. That's actually staying behind.
Yeah.
And so staying true to what the brand is for, um, is moving in evolution with the customer.
No, absolutely. I love that. So I want to pivot us a bit, because a lot of what you said, it needs to take shape in order for us to be successful as entrepreneurs. We need to see it take shape in our week, right? And you mentioned that earlier. So what systems or habits can founders establish so that every customer interaction makes their marketing stronger rather than starting from scratch every time? So as we live beside our market, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Because obviously it's the tactical practical, right? And I would say the system is probably simpler than it sounds because the system already exists. And so when you put your brand inside of the market, when you put your brand inside of the ecosystem, the market becomes the template. So your person, their options, their moment, right? The three things I mentioned in the beginning, when you can match your business to it, let's say one habit per piece, and of course, everyone's business is different, the compounding in essence will start to take care of itself, right? And so the question has to be also, well, if your marketing is starting from scratch, the question also has to be, well, why is it starting from scratch? Because most of us, um, at some point, maybe that is today, maybe that is in the past, treat the sale like the scoreboard, right? Yes, no, red light, green light. And of course, listen, revenue drives a business. It lives and dies by it. Of course it does. But right now, you know, um, the word, right? Would be that it's red or green, but it's a lagging indicator. And so it's the record of a decision that already happened. If yes or no on the sale is the only thing that you're reading and building habits around and building your day to day and building your system and building your structure around, you are still in reactive mode, which is why likely every campaign would be starting from zero because really nothing but the score was kept. And so, what I recommend and what I do in my own businesses is build one habit per piece of the market. And I'm going to keep this general on purpose because I don't know exactly the businesses that are in the room, but, and this needs to fit your business deeply, but for your person, right? Keep every word that your market is giving you, every single word in whatever form your business receives them, right? Because again, every business is going to be different. This could be, um, reviews, this could be emails, this could be phone calls, this could be conversations at a counter. This could be a customer service rep relaying information to you, but nothing can disappear, right? And so that's for the person. For their options, which would be step two, I would say a regular look into what's happening around you, what's happening in the industry, what's quietly becoming the standard. And the deeper that you know your customer, the deeper that you know their lived day to day, hour by hour experience, the easier that becomes because you will start to see these things happening preemptively. And then the third element of the market, of course, is the moment. So when a number moves, I would interrogate it actually, um, through, let's say, three different pieces before you decide what you want to hate to use the word obey, but listen to, because not every piece of data is worth listening to. And the reason I use the word compounding is because this is the part I really want to kind of harp on. When your business is inside the ecosystem, doing those simple actions day over day, you can't help but compound, right? It's like drinking water every single day. The good news is that also takes the complexity out of it because the same small actions repeated day after day stack. Every conversation informs the next piece of marketing. So every answer that you find makes the next question faster and it makes it easier. And the one thing I would kind of caution is that accumulation is not compounding, right? And it's really easy with AI to accumulate, to make documents and then upload it to AI. So I would just make sure that, that these things don't end up being a document in your Google Drive that no one's reviewing, but instead you are revisiting it. You are handing it to AI maybe once a quarter and asking what's changed in the patterns. Because now we're flipping that kind of stale information into an asset that you can live and breathe by, that goes into the system, that goes into the habits. And you know what you're building. Your competitor can copy a product, can copy an offer, can match a price, can imitate your ads, but they cannot copy what your market has told you because it's made of conversations that only you have had. And that is your moat. And those moats are what's separating businesses today. And I mentioned the three ways earlier. And so those three ways kind of pay out in this. Trust is converting the stranger. It's retaining the customer and sends you referrals. And then the banked interaction that goes out creates typically your next customer. So, almost thinking about trust as a bank balance.
Mm. Love that. Okay, so you touched on it, so we'll go ahead and we'll talk about it because it's at everyone's top of mind, right? How can AI make my life easier as an entrepreneur? We know that. So when we start talking about AI, to analyze data, to analyze these touch points from our customers, many entrepreneurs aren't sure where to begin. What are
Yeah.
some practical ways founders can use AI to better understand their audience and make smarter decisions?
Yeah. So AI is fantastic. I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of AI. Um, in the right scope and in the right depth. And so AI, as I frame it in my own business and with the businesses that I support, is basically a human plus a tool, or a team plus a tool, or a business plus a tool, right? But it comes down to in a really rudimentary sense, human plus a tool. Now, the plus sign, in my opinion, is the whole thing, right? And I say this as a daily avid user. The practical question for a founder, especially a solo founder or, a small team, isn't necessarily which AI to use or how to create an agent, but it's which side of that plus sign you're standing on when you're using it, right? And AI can be very seductive, especially for a small business, because it sounds like such beautiful relief, right? I'll build an AI agent that'll be my marketing director. And then another one will do my social. And before you know it, you have this, massive team and it gives this illusion of relief and it almost feels as if you're hiring, but you're not hiring. You are delegating an outcome to a tool, right? To go back to the human plus tool. And when you delegate the outcome, you are delegating the conversation and you're delegating the path there. And the path is where everything that we have talked about thus far actually lives. So the signals or the shifting questions, the perception shifting in the rooms. When you give away the path, um, you give away everything, right? That team of blank that you built, right? The different agents, the sum often comes then to zero. And so, in terms of practical ways, I would say AI is extraordinary at the middle work, right? So it can hold more of your customer words, expressions, feedback than you ever could. Another example is it can find patterns across, 1,000 comments in a minute. All of that's really helpful. And again, that's the middle work. But it only knows what you hand it. In other words, it has no access, it has no proximity. So it is not in your market rooms. I think when you leave it to run on its own, it is often answering a conversation from weeks or months ago. Kind of going back to the friend example I gave in the beginning. And it's like that friend who maybe calls you or you call them like once a year. And I would actually say that's not a flaw to fix with AI. That is the definition of the tool. It becomes the flaw when we're trying to use it in a way that is not the middle work. So I would say the practical rule that I personally use in my business and like I said with clients is we're delegating tasks, but we're never delegating outcomes. So in other words, you're folding AI into your process, but you're never asking for a result or handing in a result and just kind of walking away. And so what does that look like? Um, One could be listening at scale. And so this could look like handing every review, comment, DM. If you're having sales calls and you're recording them, you could upload that. Email that maybe the market has sent you and ask it to find patterns. Ask it to find the recurring words. Ask it to find the objections. And it does in minutes what would probably take you a month to do. And you may even be biased, right? As we all are as humans, because it's your business. But then you, as the founder, you as the operator, need to decide what the patterns actually mean, right? And that meaning requires you being in the room, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. Um, Another really practical, tangible way is something I refer to as the vocabulary gap. And in other words, we're asking what what words your customers are using that maybe you're not. And then how do we close that gap? And those words can change day to day because of perception, because of social media, because of everything that we've been talking about, of every customer having basically a broadcast tower, right? So when your message is consistently sounding like their internal thoughts, they will feel understood. Another option that I actually use this for, and this is a little bit controversial, and I'd love to know how people in the comments are using it if they've ever tried this, but is rehearsal. And so maybe you want to do some sort of like um, mock situation where you are having AI play your most skeptical customer and potentially poking holes in your message before any real money, any real customers are watching. And then the final way is drafting. And I know this is really, really popular, but I want to add a caveat to it. It's drafting within your judgment. And so what I mean by that is we're not handing it information and saying, write me this web page, write me this social, write me a month of ads, XYZ. But instead, I could say a really practical way would be let it produce the first version of whatever it is you're trying to make. And then you need to make the last pass, always, because your name, your business's name, your personal reputation is the name that that customers are trusting or not, right? And I think the final thing I would say about AI, and again, as someone who uses this and am helping 7 to 9 figure businesses implement it into their businesses where there's a lot at stake, what I would just want to close with is remember what it multiplies because AI is a multiplier. So, in other words, if you hand it clarity, it will multiply clarity. If you hand it confusion and questions and sort this out, it's going to multiply that confusion, except it's going to be really, really pretty confusion. And you may think that it's not, right? And that's kind of where the term AI slop comes in. And so for a smaller, medium-sized business that typically is either a solo founder or a small team with these really great, fresh inputs doing the middle work, you will outwork a team of 5, 6, or 7. So it is a really incredibly powerful tool for the middle work.
Love that. And I definitely want to see in the chat. I can't see it yet, but we'll come to it once we finish. How are you using AI for your marketing, for your data-driven information, your analysis? How are you using AI? What tools are you using? Let's share that in the chat so we can come back to it during questions, just to see what your peers are doing and what they're using out here. And Samantha, you led right into this, and I love that. Many small businesses believe that they can't compete with larger companies because they lack marketing resources. How can data-driven positioning help smaller companies outperform competitors with much bigger budgets? What you said that made me, you just said it. They will outwork the bigger teams if they are using their data correctly. So how do you feel about that?
I love this question so much. Um, because in the last 18, 24 months, the answer flipped and it's actually really easy to miss. And so, what I mean by that is, for the first time in entrepreneurial history, marketing history, sales history, the big brands, the big companies with like the very sexy budgets are quite literally copying the small brands. And so if you watch what the giants are doing right now, and then you ask yourself why, which of course I do all day, you kind of get this answer, right? So 10 years ago, budget was the silver bullet, right? You could flood the market, you could do streaming ads, you could do meta ads, you could be on every channel, you could hire people, you could have a social media manager. Um, and then small brands really relied on conversation, on social, on one-to-one, on community. But back then, it wasn't strategy, it was all they could afford. And then what we've realized, and this is very much, yeah, I would say definitely the past 18, 24 months, but I think this really started post-COVID when everyone got online in a different way and started consuming in a different way. But that silver bullet basically stopped firing. And consumers basically stopped responding to that flood. Because remember, and I said this earlier, but the consumer market has, the consumer experience has completely shifted. And I'll speak for myself, and I think probably all of us can agree, we can smell a broadcast through the screen. I see ad and I keep going. Attention got really cheap and trust got really, really rare. And so, like I mentioned, we look at the past 18, 24 months and we have mega, mega brands. I'm talking airlines, fast food chains, companies with the biggest budgets on earth, budgets that oftentimes we can't even fathom how much money they spend on these ads, are working themselves into creator content, are mimicking organic formats, are jumping into the comment sections, right? Trying to sound like a person instead of a company. And that's not by chance. that is actually by necessity. So now the tables have turned, and now the big brands are acting out of necessity, right? They're spending millions to literally look like they don't have millions,
Mm.
which is so interesting. And the small brands that used to apologize for maybe not having that are now in the driver's seat. And I would say the distinction is really specific and really clear, but it's also as a small or medium business, your whole edge. And it's that these big brands can mimic the format, right? I know we've all seen it. I don't want to call out anyone in particular, but like airlines are a big one where we'll see this. They can mimic the format, but they can't actually mimic the function that's happening and the actual interaction and exchange that's happening, right? And so they can dress up like a conversation. They can be in the comment section. They can use creators, who are natural comedians and try to work their content into that format, but they can't actually be in a conversation, right? Every reply is going through a committee. Every pivot takes 2 quarters. They typically can't know customers by name, even if they wanted to, whereas you can. And so I would say this is where, to bring it back to our conversation, this is where data-driven positioning really seals it because your data is different in kind, not just in size. So their data is the spreadsheets, it's the aggregates, the averages, it's lagging data. Whereas your data is names and sentences, right? So it's the people, the rooms, the file, it's your market's actual words. And they know what 1 million people did last quarter. Okay. You know what 50 people are worried about this week. Massive difference, right? I I joke that this is specificity in the form of love. Um, so in other words, the more precisely you speak to someone's actual problem, the more they feel seen. And a big brand just cannot love 10 million people that specifically. Whereas you, small, medium business, can love 500 people. And in that scenario, budget actually never enters the equation at all. And so, just to kind of land this plane, one warning I would just want to give because it's kind of the whole point is that the biggest mistake a small brand can make right now is graduating out of this, right? And that sounds counterintuitive. Growing little, hiring an agency, um, starting to sound like a smaller version of a big company right at the moment when big companies are paying big, big bucks to sound like you. So, what I would just say is don't trade the substance for a dupe of what you already have.
Amazing. The whole conversation, that piece was, it just made me think about what was going on, I guess a few months ago now, between the fast food restaurants with their CEOs coming with
Yeah.
content, and we know, like you said, one of those fast food restaurants has came out on top of that whole thing. But to your
Yeah.
point, they just became content creators, right? They sat their CEO in front of a camera and said, "Here, do this and look like you like."
Yes.
And we saw what came out of that. So I think it's amazing that you mentioned how those big brands are trying to achieve what so many small and medium-sized businesses have, right?
Yeah.
Community-based leadership. You're in the community, you know what's going on, you have that pulse on it, and they want that. So make sure that we, keep that as entrepreneurs. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
That
fun to watch. It's fun to watch it play out because every week it's like a new scandal,
yeah.
a new thing happening, a new, brand in the comment section
And
and
yeah,
fighting for space.
I always wonder who's behind, like what actual person is behind those brands in the comments. Because I'm a serial TikToker, I'm not gonna lie.
Yes,
So I
totally.
love, love, love seeing it, and I am easily influenced. I got a Whopper this weekend. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't had a Whopper in years, and I definitely went and bought one this weekend. So I love
Yeah.
can see it because it works. It really
Yeah,
works for consumers, like you said.
it
So
does.
as like you said, as we round out, and you touched on this, and I love that, staying close to the community, keeping that heart and that passion. But if founders left today's session and focused on one activity over the next 30 days that would significantly strengthen their positioning using data and AI, what would you recommend they prioritize?
Yeah, I love this. Okay, one activity. I would say spend the next 30 days moving your business inside the market. And I kind of opened up by talking about, and we touched on this throughout, the market not being a separate entity from your business. And I mean that literally. So a business outside the market, outside its market, is going to find out about change through revenue, which we talked about earlier. A business inside the market is going to find out from its customers months earlier and then preemptively be able to make changes. Um, and these are the same three pieces that we've kind of been riffing on this whole hour, which is going to be your person, their options, and their moment. And 30 days, you can really do a lot. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, I feel like I'm already embedded in my market, in which case, great, this applies to you as well. Or maybe you're thinking to yourself, I don't know how to do that. I need to do that. Let's start. This is going to apply to you. So either way, no matter which end of the spectrum you're on. Um, so I want to make outside and inside really, really concrete because you'll recognize one of these as your actual week, right? So outside the market looks like this. You create marketing material and then you're checking the numbers. Maybe you're running the ad, you launch the offer, you build the partnership, and then you wait to see basically what happens. And so you learn about your customers, what your customers want or what you think they want from a dashboard. And that can feel very fulfilling, by the way. I'm a data person, so I love looking at a dashboard. But once you see the results from doing it the reverse, you won't want a dashboard. But whether the news is good or bad isn't the point, right? So it's not, okay, sales went up, great, or sales went down, bad. The point is that every piece of that is, as I mentioned, a lagging indicator. And lagging indicators are always going to keep you in a permanent state of reaction, right? So that's going to be outside the market. And then inside the market looks like this. Before you create anything, you know what your market has been saying. You know what the weather is inside of your market. You know the questions that came in this month. You know what people compared you to. So your marketing goes out already shaped by the words that came in. That would be inside. And so the difference in one line, if you just want to take away one line from it, is outside is going to be your words go first. Inside would be their words go first. And so here's the test, if you will, one question that we can all sit and think about. Maybe you have the answer right now, maybe you want to sit with it, but your last marketing decision, did it start from something your market told you or something that you assumed? Because if it started from an assumption, you're outside. And there's no shame in it, by the way. A lot of us live there until we learn to live inside. And the next 30 days is basically how you make that move. So if we want a little bit of literal homework, um, here it is. I would say take one page, whether it be a Google Doc, handwritten, whatever you fancy, one page, three headings, right? And you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say person, options, moment. So your person, their options, their moment, right? And have these three columns. And on day one, I want you to fill out, maybe that's later today, I want you to fill out that page with your best guesses, right? And they're going to be educated guesses. Don't get me wrong. I trust that you believe that you know your market. They're going to be educated guesses, but they're guesses nonetheless. And that's typically where everyone starts. And then you spend the next 30 days making that page true instead of guess. So every review that you read, every question that comes in, every conversation that your business has in whatever form that it has them. Again, I don't know the businesses on the line at the moment. Um, replace a guess with your market's actual words. And what I want to be honest about and why this page is really make or break it is without it, nothing else works. So it may feel basic, it may feel rudimentary, but it's actually not. A lot of times that refinement of the simple tasks get you a lot farther than like hyper complicated um, spreadsheets or tasks. And so it's the equivalent of not knowing if you're driving a car, are you riding a bike, are you in an airplane? That is how different marketing feels depending on whether you truly know the market or you don't. All of those things can get you from point A to point B. And that's where things get tricky, right? But if you don't know which one you're in, and then take it a step further, what kind of car, what kind of bike, what kind of airplane, and that is how you start to deeply understand, right? And then what I would also challenge you to do to round out the exercise at the end of the 30 days is to actually grade that page because there are real signs that you have shifted from outside to inside, or maybe you were already on the cusp of being inside and now you're really settled inside, right? So if you can describe your person's week right now without guessing, or when a number moves, whatever your KPIs are, you usually know the why before you even check. Another one is that you're hearing about changes from your market before the dashboard tells you. So you can preemptively see that. And the words on that page that you create in your marketing are your market's words, not your own assumptions dressed up. If those things are true, you're on the inside. If they're not yet, please don't take that as a failure. It's not. This is an ongoing process. And this page is really just like the map for your next 30 days. Um, the way that I think about it and the way that I recommend you think about it is that the market itself is a template, almost like sketch paper. You know, if you have kids or if you remember from when you were a kid, that really sheer paper, right? I want you to think about that sketch paper laid over your business. And so every week, your business should trace just a little bit closer. And when it does, marketing stops being a performance that you have to put out and broadcast, and it becomes a conversation that you are already inside of. And I would say that's really the whole session that we've had today and kind of like one action. Because it allows people to make a purchase not because they understand you, but because they feel understood. And it's impossible to make someone feel understood from outside the room, right? Their words are already there. Your market likely has been handing them to you this whole time. And so now for the next 30 days, I would say just try to catch those words.
Absolutely amazing. I love the psychology-based marketing that we got into today. I mean, and
Yeah.
it's invaluable, right? To be able to understand the way the market thinks and then respond to them in a way that they're going to listen to,
Yeah.
that's what it's about.
Yeah.
So I want to open up a space. I know we're getting close to time in this conversation, and Samantha answered so many yummy questions today. Do we have any questions for Samantha? We did just drop her information in the chat so that you can connect with her as well on LinkedIn to continue following her and her journey and her insights. So, do we have any questions today? So, the question, let me make sure I'm reading correctly. We got her info, amazing, to send it to address the repeating question from my person and people. Do I understand? So to address the repeating question from my person, do I post a blog page or use the topic as a headline for an ad? How do I answer the question?
Okay, just to clarify, how do you answer the question about
You're
your
so my customer keeps saying the same thing.
yeah.
How do I respond to that question in a good way to get the message across?
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. So you've gotten this market feedback and now you're saying, okay, I have enough, I've gathered enough, I'm ready to take a response to that. I would say that really depends on what your natural flow of marketing is right now. So if you're using social media, I definitely do that. I think part of the question asked about a blog post.
Mm.
That's a great way to do it, right? And we can also think about, to kind of go back to the psychology, we can also think about what are a few ways in which we can address this question from maybe a tangible need, a psychological need, an emotional need, so that we're actually hitting it for multiple places, right? Because any buying decision or any perception comes from typically a logical and an emotional need. And so you can even break that down into smaller pieces. And then those become threads, maybe literally threads, depending on what you're using as a marketing tool. Um, but that you can then continue to build on, right? So you say, hey, I really noticed a response when I put out this more emotional shift. Let me go deeper on that. Or I noticed, okay, people are more focused on the logical side of things. Let me dig into that a little bit deeper. I actually have a really good example of this from from two clients that I worked with, and they could not be more opposite, which is why I like to use them as an example, and they were kind of top of mind earlier today. But if we go back to 2020, I know all of us cringe a little bit at that. But if we go back to 2020 and 2021, 22, the shift, we saw a lot of businesses flourish and a lot of businesses actually struggle and shut down. And one main thing that I noticed in working with businesses and in having conversations at this time is that the shift wasn't always obvious. And so, for example, when everyone was working from home and we had more time, skincare became more of a routine focused event, right? For the women in the room and maybe the gents in the room. So maybe it was a 4 or 5 step skincare routine, and this was all over social. And we saw skincare brands then coming out with these routines that were multi-step. What we didn't see after that was that a lot of brands come 24, 25 started to really struggle because people were returning to work and no longer had time for these routines. And by time that showed up in sales, in revenue, we didn't know what the issue was necessarily, right? These skincare brands didn't necessarily know what the issue was. So what was happening is that people were saying, I loved it. I love the feeling of a routine, but I no longer have 30 minutes. I no longer have 20 minutes twice a day because I'm now running out the door. Now I have childcare. Now I have a commute. Now I have these things. And so the answer was not that the product was wrong. It was not that the marketing was inherently wrong, but it was that the state of the person, to go back to your question, the state of the person had shifted, right? That's one example in skincare. To the opposite example in plumbing, to take it back to 2020 versus now, what was very appealing back in 2020 when people were working from home, or I would say right past the pandemic, once people felt safe having folks in their home, a big shift was, maybe we offer a longer service. Maybe we offer for the same price, the same service broken into two. Well, the return to work really shifted that, where people are saying, I don't have the time. So it wasn't that the service or the company was no longer good, it was that we were dealing with time. And the reason I bring up those two opposite examples is because both the lever is time, and the only way to know that is to understand your positioning.
Oh, wow. So powerful. Oh my gosh. So this was an amazing session. I've seen some comments in the chat. I wish we had more time for it just to be able to dig in a little bit deeper. But Samantha, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the community and share your insights and set such a great overview.
Thank you
On
so
behalf
much.
of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone in attendance today, we sincerely thank you for joining us. This was a great conversation.
This was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who attended. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to continue the conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Samantha. And to our attendees, as always, we would love for you to join us for our upcoming webinars. The links are in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back soon.
Bye. Thank you so much.